Thanks, Don. Thank you all. Good afternoon. Boa tarde. First and foremost, I'm a teacher. So I'm a Portuguese language teacher, and although I'm working at Fresno State, my proud home for 22 years is Tulare Union High School.
All right.
That's right. And thanks to Mr. Berger, who believed in me, and I have appreciated it ever since. So thanks all of you for being here. The presentation that Don asked me to make is a little bit about Portugal, the Azores, and the Portuguese diaspora, and we can do that in about 40 minutes. Good luck, but we'll try, because there is Portuguese Heritage Month here in California, and we're very proud of that. There's two different events that we're very, very proud that the state acknowledges. First of all, June as Portuguese Heritage Month, and that it makes sense because of all the different festas. There are over 80 festas in the month of June and July throughout the state of California. The other one is the second week of March, and it's Portuguese Immigrant Week, and it was done in 1968 by then Governor Ronald Reagan, and it's been signed by every single governor since then. And Portuguese Immigrant Week, even though we have not had immigration in about 40 years, it still makes sense because whether people were immigrants such as myself, but if it wasn't, it's either parents or grandparents or great-grandparents, so the immigrant spirit is still alive in the Portuguese American community. So I just wanted to show you a little bit about the two slides there. I mean, this slide, there are two parts. Are, of course, Portugal, as you can see there, and California. And a lot because sometimes people say, and I remember students used to say this in my classroom, gosh, it kind of looks like Portugal and California are about the same. They are, in a way. Portugal is 92 square kilometers, and California is 403 square kilometers. So California is about 4.5 times larger than Portugal, but it has a little bit of the geographical composition. And of course, as you know, we have nearly 40 million here. In Portugal, we have about 10.5 million. And then off to my right side there, and your right side as well, is of course the archipelago of the Azores, 9 islands that go from Santa Maria to Corvo. The right side being closer to Europe, and the left side, Flores and Corvo, Flores Island there, on the left side closer to the United States. Actually, there's a wonderful story when the ships used to go off between the United States and Europe, and folks in Flores would see the lights, and they've always thought that they were the closer, and they're the closer to American soil is the island of Flores, and people would see those lights way far out. They would say, some of the older generation, we're talking about, early part of the 20th century, they would say, look, the lights are on in America. We can see America from here. And so it wasn't really America, because America was now 4.5-hour flight. And so a little bit about Portugal, and a little bit about how it began, and I think I can project my voice without the microphone. So this is a current map of Portugal. And Portugal is a very, very old country, and we'll learn a little bit about that. But the Portugal when it was first founded in 1139, it was basically just where you see the green part, okay? So if you look on top there, you'll see it says Northern Portugal, and it says Guimarães. Guimarães was the first capital of Portugal. That was Portugal in 1139, that green part. And that green part used to be a part of another kingdom. It was the Kingdom of Castile, which became a modern-day Spain. So from that green part, Portugal grew all the way down until you see the bottom part there, the city of Faro at the tip. And then, of course, it grew in other areas that we'll talk about. And before, it was a county, part of Castile, and it was actually a place kind of what America has been. It was a melting pot for everybody, from the Carthaginians to the Phoenicians to the Celts, to everybody wanted to have a foot in Portugal because of its closeness to the sea, because of its climate, and because Lisbon existed already, as I'll point out to you in a little bit. And so, how did Portugal begin? As I mentioned, 1139 was the establishment of the Kingdom of Portugal. So, as you can see, Portugal is way over 800 years old. And the Kingdom of Portugal was established in 1139 by Afonso Henriques, or Afonso I, who ruled Portugal, as you can see there, from 1139 to 1185. So, how did the kingdom come about? He took up arms against his own mother, because his mother was the daughter of the King of Castile, and the mother was in charge of the county. His father was in charge of the county. His father passed away, and then his mother, Dona Teresa, became the head of the county that was a part of the kingdom. He, quite a few noblemen wanted the county to be independent. And so what happened was that they they began, as Don Afonso Henriques was getting his education, to convince him that Portugal needed to be its own kingdom, that we should not be part of all of the other kingdoms that compose, the different kingdoms that compose today's Spain. And so he took up arms against his mother, and he did win. His forces did win. And so, as you can see there, it became official, though, in 1179. Believe that. So it was an independent kingdom. It functioned as an independent kingdom, but it was not recognized as such by the Pope. And so it was in 1179, as you can see there, the 23rd day of May, that the Manifestis Probatum by Alexander III confirmed Portugal as a full-fledged kingdom recognized by the Pope. So it took quite a few years, although he was King of Portugal from 1139 to 1185, recognized by the Pope for only a few years, for only the last 6 years of his reign. And so Portugal has maintained its borders, basically, the borders that you saw. I'll go back. So these borders have been in effect for almost 1,000 years. That much has not changed, as you can see. And the borders in Portugal were 1139 was the green part, and then the other parts came in a little bit at a time, because this was happening during the Reconquista. I can say it better in Portuguese, I can say it in English. The reconquest of the Christian reconquest, because the Iberian Peninsula was controlled by the Moors for over 700 years, and we have a lot of Moorish influence in Portugal, especially southern Portugal. All names in Portuguese that start with AL are of Moorish background. For those of you who have any connection with the island of Terceira, there's a famous dish that you've heard. Probably, I know that many of you have traveled back there. It's called alcatra, A-L-C-A-T-R-A. It's a roasted meat dish, alcatra. And we always knew, or I always knew, that it had some kind of an Arabic influence. But just 2 semesters ago, at one of the courses I taught at Fresno State, a student came up to me, and he was Arabic, and he came up to me from his family had moved here from Iran quite a few years ago, and he told me, "What is that dish that you're talking about?" And I explained to him, and he says, "How do you pronounce it again?" I said, "Alcatra." He said, "Oh my, that's how we old Arabic used to say roasted meat." And so it's basically an influence from the Arabs being in the Iberian Peninsula for 700 years. And we were able to pick up on all of that. And so a little bit about Portugal, as I mentioned, one of the oldest countries in Europe. It passed through many different civilizations. Its capital city is Lisbon. And Lisbon is known to be much older than Rome because the Phoenicians settled there in 1200 BC. And so it was an excellent trading post because it was really there at the tip and very close to the Mediterranean. And so Portugal has had its same borders since 1297. The borders have not changed in Portugal. Now, we've lost our independence once, but we did not change borders. When we regained our independence, we maintained the same borders. And I'm not going to give you a full-fledged, of course, history lesson on 800 years of the monarchy because that would take forever and you'd be bored to death. But I wanted to touch upon a couple of people. So Dom Afonso Henriques, because he was the one who took up arms against his mother and began the kingdom. And then a few years later, quite a few years later, as you can see there, about 150 years later, we had two people that shaped the Portuguese and the Azorean thought. And that's why I'm kind of trying to give you in this brief presentation. And they were Dom Diniz, him and I share a name, so I'm happy for that, and or Diniz in English, and his wife. His wife, Isabel of Aragon, who became Isabel of Portugal. As you all know, people didn't get married because they loved each other in the monarchy, maybe now in the modern monarchy a little bit. If the queen doesn't have a say so in it, in England, but certainly not in Middle Ages. It was they were all marriages for a purpose, and so if we look at this, we look at. Dom Diniz was the sixth king of Portugal, so a little bit after Dom Afonso Henriques, like his great grandfather was the first king of Portugal, and he had an important part in Portugal that shaped who the country became, what the country became, and also shaped the 9 islands of the Azores later on. First of all, was in the economy. So he made the aristocrats actually that own big chunks of land cultivate the land, and that's why he's known in Portugal as o lavrador, Dom Diniz, the farmer. He began a barter system of trading goods, so people would have a way to trade their goods and get some economic stability. And he began something called Estudos Gerais, which is the first university in Portugal and one of the oldest universities in the world in 1290. It's now called Universidade de Coimbra, or Coimbra University. And why did he do that? Because he felt that the Catholic Church had too much power in education. Everybody was educated through the church. They were the ones and the priests were educated. They educated the monarchs. They educated everybody. And he thought that the state should have a say-so. And so he set up a university, what we call today a university, Estudos Gerais, that had both clerics, but had also some other folks, men, mainly no women, obviously at that time, men of knowledge that were directly or indirectly tied to the church. And the other thing that he did was he planted a forest called Pinhal de Leiria. So if you, just show you that a little bit. If we go back to Portugal, this area right north of Lisbon, right there a little bit. In between Lisbon, here we go, in between Lisbon and Coimbra, so this area right in here. The noblemen complained that they couldn't, that it was worthless to plant because then these storms would come out from the Atlantic and there goes the crops. And so he planted this pinhal, this forest, in order to protect from the Atlantic storms that were brutal and still are in a way, but they were certainly brutal quite a few years, 500, 600, 700 years ago. By doing that, it was a visionary in many things. First of all, it did allow for the kingdom to prosper and for the aristocrats to begin cultivating their fields. And second of all, a few hundred years later, in the 1400s, it was pivotal that Portugal had a great forest that we could use to build ships to go out into the world. And then his wife was also a key figure in the Portuguese history. As I said, her name is Isabel of Aragon, Rainha Santa Isabel, Saintly Queen, as she's known. There you can see is the miracle or the legend of the roses. And she's responsible for the first Portuguese festas that we know today in the United States. The first festa was held by her, and she convinced Dom Diniz to give up the crown for a day and crown the poorest person in the village. Well, whether he or she was, or he, whether he was the poorest or not, we don't know. But it was one of the poorest, in the village. And the idea was for that person to have a moment in life where he felt that, he was worth more than just being a peasant all of his life. That's the idea of the festich. And of course, what did they serve? They served exactly what we still serve today, which is bread. At that time, bread that was about 5 or 6 days old and a little bit stale that nobody wanted to eat, but in a sopa, hey, you know, and some meats that you make broth that can feed a lot of people. So it's the same concept that still is used today. There's a lot of myth around Isabel. And that's good, you know, some myth is good, stories are good. It's like when you go to the Azores and there's 2 beautiful lakes, and the lakes are basically, people say it's because they were formed because of a green-eyed shepherd and a blue-eyed princess fell in love, and then one day they went back because the father found out about this love, and they said, nah, you're a princess, you can't marry a shepherd. And so then they went back for one last hooray, and they said, and then they just cried and cried and cried, and of course the green eyes from the green lake and the blue eyes from the blue. And I used to tell the story to my students when we talked about the topography of the Azores. And the truth, of course, is the shallowness of the lakes and the way the sun hits. But my gosh, the other story is much better. Who cares about how the sun